So apparently all it takes to get a SWAT team and firefighters at your door is simply working on your own land, with your friends. Yup, that's exactly what happened when my lovely neighbor Nancy decided to call 911 on me just because she saw me doing farm work on my own property. Who knew that feeding cows and fixing fences could trigger such a dramatic response? But Nancy, being the concerned citizen that she is, couldn't let me just live my peaceful life. Stick around, because this story takes some wild turns. And hey, what would you do in my situation? Drop a comment below. I was sitting on my front porch drinking iced tea, listening to my cows chewing grass in the distance. This organic farm has been in my family for 3 generations, ever since my grandpa started it back in 1952. We grow clean vegetables and raise happy, healthy cows, everything completely legal and environmentally friendly. My daily routine was simple and peaceful. Wake up at sunrise, feed the animals, check the crops, maybe work on some farm maintenance. The kind of life that people in the city dream about when they're stuck in traffic for 2 hours every morning. Life was absolutely perfect until she moved in next door. I should have known something was off when the moving trucks showed up, but honestly, I was just being neighborly, thinking maybe I'd finally have someone decent to talk to over the fence. Looking back now, I realize I was being way too optimistic about having a normal neighbor move in next to a working farm. The moving process itself was bizarre. She had contractors installing security cameras, motion sensors, and what looked like professional sound recording equipment all around her property. Who does that on their first day in a new neighborhood? But I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just security conscious after living in the city. The woman next door, Nancy, of course, had this way of inserting herself into everyone's business, even though no one had asked her to. She made it clear who the real boss was around here. Around 50 years old, with fake blonde hair that screamed expensive salon, always wearing a frown, like someone had personally offended her, and those ridiculously oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. The woman dressed like she was heading to a Beverly Hills charity luncheon every single day, even when she was just checking her mailbox. But what really bothered me was how she watched everything I did with this calculating stare, like she was taking mental notes. What I didn't know at the time was that she'd been watching my farm from her fancy new house for days, studying my routine like some kind of surveillance operation. She had notebooks, actual notebooks, where she recorded the times I fed my animals, when I used farm equipment, even when my dogs barked. Later I found out she'd been going around asking other neighbors about me, like she was building some kind of case file. Questions like, how long has that farm been operating? And, have you ever complained about the noise or smells? I mean, who does that? The fact that she was documenting everything from day one should have told me this wasn't going to be a normal neighbor dispute. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon when she first approached my fence. Her face was already red with anger before she even opened her mouth. "Do you know the rules of this neighborhood? You're making way too much noise out here," she said in this high-pitched, irritating voice that could probably shatter glass. I nearly dropped my iced tea. "Excuse me, did you really just say that? Am I hearing this correctly?" I looked around confused. The only sounds at that moment were my cows peacefully chewing grass and a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. That's it. I actually had to stop and stare at her after that one. Was this woman seriously complaining about the sound of cows eating grass? I don't just stand there bewildered by her accusation. My hand tightens around the iced tea glass. I pace to the edge of my porch, looking down at her with growing frustration. "Nancy, I've been farming this land longer than you've lived in this state. These animals aren't making noise, they're living their lives." My voice carries more edge than I intended. Maybe this is more than a simple neighbor complaint. Maybe she's already planning her next move, and this confrontation is just the opening shot in a war I didn't know had started. Nancy straightened up like she was about to give a presidential address and introduced herself as the HOA. President, and let me tell you, she treated this volunteer position like she was running the entire country. She pulled out this thick folder stuffed with papers about noise pollution regulations and agricultural activities that disturb residential communities. "I have a serious responsibility to protect the quality of life in this upscale neighborhood," she declared dramatically. "This community has standards that must be maintained." I'm thinking to myself, upscale neighborhood. Lady, this is farmland that's been here since before you were born. The audacity of this woman was absolutely incredible. Over the next few days, Nancy started doing some really weird stuff that made my skin crawl. taking photos and videos of my farm from multiple angles like she was documenting evidence for a crime scene. She had this huge professional camera with a telephoto lens, the kind photographers use for wildlife shots, and she'd stand at her window for hours just filming my daily activities. Installing a handmade "no noise after 5 p.m. sign right next to my property line, even though she had absolutely no legal authority to do that. Standing at her window and staring at me with pure hatred whenever I was feeding my animals or doing normal farm work. I wasn't just sitting back anymore. I took out my camera, started filming her as she paced around my property. If she was going to document everything I did, so was I. The woman was clearly obsessed with monitoring everything I did. She even started timing my activities with a stopwatch and keeping detailed logs. I caught her measuring the distance between her house and my barn with one of those surveyor's wheels. Does she actually have the legal right to do any of this? I kept wondering. Instead of getting into an immediate fight, I decided to be smart about it and research the actual laws first. Through watching Nancy's systematic and calculated behavior, I slowly realized she wasn't just some difficult neighbor having a bad week. She had a specific, deliberate plan to get me off my land completely. She wanted my family's farm to disappear so she could turn the area into something that matched her vision of a perfect upscale community. Maybe a golf course, rose garden, or just empty land that wouldn't disturb her peace and quiet. In her mind, my farm was an ugly stain on her expensive neighborhood paradise. What really bothered me was how calculated everything felt. This wasn't random complaints she was building towards something bigger. I started keeping notes of every interaction, every strange behavior every time she took photos. Something told me I was going to need evidence later. The level of surveillance and documentation was honestly creepy, like she was preparing for war before I even knew we were in a battle. At that moment, I thought I was dealing with just another difficult neighbor who would eventually get bored and leave me alone. But looking at the cold, calculating look in Nancy's eyes whenever she stared at my property, I started getting this sinking feeling that this woman was capable of much more than I could imagine. I knew the letter was only the beginning. What would she pull next? I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me it was going to be a lot worse than just complaints about cow sounds. The next morning, I walked out to get my mail and found a thick official-looking envelope from the HOA. I ripped the letter open. Each word feels like a slap to the face. Nancy's name stands out bold, accusatory. My hands ball into fists. This isn't just a notice, it's an intrusion. The letter listed my supposed violations. Operating lawn mowing equipment on weekend mornings, I mowed at 10 a.m., which is totally reasonable. Allowing agricultural odors to affect neighboring properties, even though I handle manure disposal according to all organic farming standards. Permitting excessive dog barking during livestock management. My dogs only bark when they're doing their actual job herding cattle. I didn't just stand there thinking about the fine. I called up my lawyer determined to put a stop to this before it got any worse. This wasn't just about noise complaints anymore. Nancy had overstepped. Big time. I read the letter 3 times feeling increasingly trapped, but trying to stay calm and think rationally. The language was so formal and threatening, it felt like I was being sued for running my own family business. Does she really have the legal authority to send me this? The lawyer's secretary scheduled me for an emergency consultation that afternoon. I decided to understand what my actual rights and responsibilities were in this situation. But Nancy wasn't stopping with warning letters. She had a much more sophisticated plan in motion. She started going door to door throughout our neighborhood, specifically targeting residents who didn't know me personally or had never visited my farm. Her pitch was always the same. Dan at that farm is seriously damaging our community's quality of life. Bad smells, constant noise, and all that agricultural mess is probably lowering our property values significantly. I wish I could tell you I was surprised by this, but honestly, it felt like classic Nancy behavior. The woman was methodical in her approach to turning people against me, hitting all the emotional buttons that would make homeowners panic about their investments. She even created a PowerPoint presentation, a freaking PowerPoint, with charts and graphs showing declining property values in agricultural adjacent neighborhoods. Where she got this data, I have no idea, but it looked official enough to scare people who didn't know any better. She scheduled community information sessions in her living room, complete with refreshments and printed handouts about the dangers of unregulated farming operations. The level of organization was terrifying. She was smart about her timing, too. approaching people during weekday afternoons when younger working families weren't home, focusing on retirees who spent more time at home and might be more sensitive to any changes in their environment. Within a week, I started noticing the effects of her campaign. A few older residents who used to wave when they saw me suddenly started looking at me with suspicion and distrust. Mr. Peterson, who had been my friendly neighbor for over 20 years, suddenly started avoiding eye contact whenever our paths crossed. Mrs. Johnson, who used to bring me homemade cookies during holidays, walked quickly past my property without even acknowledging my existence. At first, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. But with each new letter, each new violation, I felt my frustration building. I wasn't about to let this woman tear apart the peace I'd worked for. I felt increasingly isolated and confused about what exactly Nancy had told these people about me. I contacted a lawyer who specializes in agricultural land rights for a consultation. His advice was sobering. You need to be very careful here. HOA. Organizations can create serious legal and financial pressure if they have a specific agenda against a property owner. That conversation confirmed what my gut had been telling me. This wasn't going to blow over on its own. The lawyer's warning about HOA, organizations with specific agendas, really stuck with me. Nancy definitely had a specific agenda, and I was starting to realize how much power she actually wielded in this community. Through studying Nancy's systematic and organized actions, I began to understand that she wasn't just some annoying neighbor having a temporary problem with farm life. She had developed a comprehensive long-term strategy to force me off my land entirely. Her ultimate goal was to eliminate my farm's presence so she could create her fantasy version of a perfect upscale residential community. I started dedicating serious time to researching agricultural protection laws, property rights legislation, and HOA regulatory limitations. If Nancy wanted to start a legal war, I was determined to understand exactly what weapons were available to both sides. I spent every evening reading through legal documents, trying to understand the complex relationship between property rights and community regulations. I spent hours reading through county zoning laws, state agricultural protection statutes, and precedent cases involving HOA overreach. The more I researched, the more I realized this situation was way more complicated than I'd initially thought. Nancy had clearly done her homework about HOA powers and community regulations. But I was starting to discover some interesting information about agricultural protection laws that might work in my favor. I thought doing research and understanding my legal rights would be enough to protect myself and my farm. But watching Nancy manipulate my neighbors so easily and systematically, I started wondering, was I actually preparing to defend myself? Or was I walking straight into a trap I couldn't even see coming? The way she operated with such confidence made me think she'd definitely done this before, and probably won. Nancy wasn't backing down, neither was I. But as I watched her disappear into the distance after another tense encounter at the fence line, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to end quietly. I really don't want this to turn into a huge fight, but if I don't try to solve this problem now, she's never going to stop escalating, I thought to myself. I decided to meet with Nancy face to face and see if we could reach some kind of reasonable compromise that would work for both of us. Nancy's living room was absolutely ridiculous, filled with expensive decorations, fancy furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and dozens of bird paintings covering every wall. Nancy sat in her chair like some kind of queen holding court, clearly expecting me to grovel and beg for her forgiveness. I should have known right then that this meeting was pointless. The woman had created this whole theatrical setting to make me feel small and intimidated before we even started talking. I came prepared with several practical solutions that could address her concerns. Installing professional sound barriers between our properties to minimize any noise. Adjusting my work schedule to avoid early morning or evening hours when people are resting. Upgrading my manure processing system to eliminate any possible odor issues. I even offered to plant a row of fast-growing trees along our property line to create a natural visual barrier. I presented these options calmly and respectfully, genuinely hoping we could find a way to coexist peacefully. Looking back, I was probably being way too optimistic about her willingness to compromise. But I had to try, right? I mean, these were reasonable solutions that any normal person would at least consider. I was offering to spend my own money to accommodate her complaints, which should have been more than enough to resolve the situation. The total cost of all my proposed solutions would have been around $15,000 money I was willing to spend just to keep the peace and protect my family's farm. But Nancy's response told me everything I needed to know about her true intentions. Nancy listened to my entire presentation with this fake, condescending smile, then completely dismissed everything I'd offered. Dan, I do appreciate your good intentions. I really do. But you need to understand that the problem here isn't actually about noise or smells. Your farm simply does not fit with the upscale living environment that this community represents. She leaned forward with this superior attitude. I invested $800,000 in this house specifically to enjoy peace, quiet, and elegant surroundings. Your agricultural operation fundamentally conflicts with that investment. That can't be right. Can it, I'm thinking to myself. $800,000 to live next to a farm that's been here for 70 years. This wasn't just about a few loud cows or late-night machinery anymore. Nancy was chipping away at something far deeper, my family's land, our legacy, and that made me more determined than ever to fight back. Then Nancy dropped the hammer. If you refuse to cooperate and find somewhere else more appropriate for your farming activities, I will absolutely take you to court. The HOA has both the authority and the responsibility to protect our community from disruptive elements. Her tone made it crystal clear. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. I walked away from Nancy's house feeling frustrated, disappointed, and honestly a little shocked. The next time I went to feed the animals, she was standing at the fence blocking my way. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The message was clear. If I didn't comply, she'd take matters into her own hands. She's completely determined to force me off my land, no matter what compromises I'm willing to make. This was never about finding a solution. Nancy had already decided I didn't belong in her neighborhood, and nothing I could offer would ever change her mind. The meeting was just a formality, so she could say she tried to work with me before destroying my life. After our failed meeting, Nancy immediately launched an even more aggressive campaign against me, sending me multiple emails every day about completely imaginary violations, threatening surprise inspections of my property to document problems, getting other HOA board members to pressure me with official-sounding letters and phone calls. I felt like a mouse trapped in an increasingly smaller maze with Nancy controlling every exit. The psychological pressure was incredible. Constant harassment, legal threats, and community isolation all happening at the same time. Okay, if Nancy wants to start a legal war, I'll show her exactly who has the actual law on their side. I committed to serious, intensive research into land law, agricultural protection statutes, and HOA regulatory limitations. I was going to find every legal tool available to protect my family's farm. I spent the next several days diving deep into county zoning regulations and grandfather clauses, state agricultural protection laws, federal farming rights legislation, court cases involving HOA, overreach, and abuse of authority. The deeper I went into the legal research, the more confident I became that Nancy had seriously overstepped her bounds. There were specific protections for agricultural operations that existed before residential development, and my farm definitely qualified. Walking away from that meeting, I realized this had moved way beyond the possibility of compromise or peaceful coexistence. But I still didn't know if fighting back would actually save my farm, or if it would just give Nancy exactly the ammunition she needed to completely destroy me. Maybe I was in over my head, but what choice did I have? Sometimes you just have to stand up and fight, even when you're not sure you can win. But something about Nancy's confident smirk when she delivered her ultimatum made me wonder if she knew something I didn't. As I turned away from another confrontation, I noticed something strange. My car was gone. No sign of it, just a single note pinned to my windshield. The community has spoken. It's time for you to leave. Instead of sitting there in frustration, I made a call to my lawyer. This wasn't going to be handled with just paperwork and polite conversations. It was time to take it to court. I wasn't backing down, not after everything Nancy had already done. I spent every evening for the next week studying agricultural law, property rights legislation, and HOA regulatory frameworks. I contacted my lawyer multiple times to verify details and make sure I understood every aspect correctly. If I can find the right legal strategy, I might actually be able to beat her at her own game, I kept thinking. The research was exhausting, but I was determined to understand every legal protection available to farmers like me. I discovered fascinating information about agricultural zoning laws, grandfather clauses, and something called right to farm legislation that protects established agricultural operations from residential encroachment. After days of exhaustive research, I found the legal principle that changed everything: HOA. Organizations cannot legally interfere with established agricultural activities if the farming operation existed before the HOA was created. My family farm was established in 1952, but Nancy's HOA was only incorporated in 2015, more than 60 years later. I couldn't believe it. How had I not known this earlier? Nancy had been threatening me with legal action that she had absolutely no authority to take. The irony was incredible. She'd spent weeks researching HOA powers, but apparently never bothered to check whether those powers actually applied to pre-existing agricultural operations. I contacted Julia, a lawyer who specializes in land rights and community legal protection. She's young, extremely smart, and has built her career fighting for people exactly like me against institutional overreach. Julia reviewed all my documentation and confirmed, "Dan, you have absolutely solid legal ground here. Nancy has clearly exceeded her authority and violated your established property rights." The relief I felt hearing those words was incredible. For weeks I'd been feeling like a victim with no options, but now I realized I actually held all the legal cards. At first it felt like I was just playing defense responding to her letters, but now I felt a shift inside me. I was done reacting. It was time to go on the offensive. Nancy had made the wrong move, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Instead of just sending threatening letters back and forth, I decided to confront Nancy directly with my new legal knowledge. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in town, for what I knew would be a very tense conversation. I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous as hell, but also excited to finally have some real ammunition. "Nancy, I've spent considerable time researching the actual law in this situation. You cannot legally continue abusing your HOA authority to interfere with my farm's operations." I calmly presented the legal documents that proved my property rights and explained exactly why her threats had no legal foundation. I watched Nancy's face carefully as I laid out the grandfather clause protections and agricultural exemptions that completely undermined her entire campaign against me. For the first time since this whole mess started, I watched Nancy's confidence completely crack. Her face went pale, and even though she tried to maintain her composure, I could see panic starting to creep into her eyes. "You can't keep fighting this. The board's already made their decision. It's too late for you to turn back now," she stammered, but her voice had lost all its previous authority. The woman who had been so confident in her threats was clearly rattled by having the actual law thrown in her face. What would you do? Keep pushing forward or try to make peace one more time? I decided to keep pressing my advantage. "Nancy, what you've been doing isn't just wrong. It's illegal harassment of a protected agricultural operation. I suggest you stop this campaign immediately before you face serious legal consequences." The look of shock and fear in Nancy's eyes was incredibly satisfying after weeks of her intimidation tactics. After our confrontation, something strange happened. Nancy completely stopped sending me warning letters and emails. But I knew this wasn't surrender or defeat. This was the kind of dangerous silence that happens right before someone unleashes their most devastating attack. I could feel Nancy regrouping and planning something much bigger and more aggressive than anything she'd tried before. People like Nancy don't back down when cornered, they escalate. She probably thinks I've backed down and given up. But I'm just getting started, and this time I'm not going to face her alone. I knew I needed to assemble a team of people I could trust to help me through whatever Nancy was planning next. The legal victory felt great, but something about Nancy's reaction told me this was far from over. When someone with her level of arrogance and control gets publicly embarrassed like that, they usually come back twice as hard. I started working on my educational content about sustainable farming planning to document this whole experience for my channel about organic agriculture. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. If Nancy could successfully force me off my land using illegal tactics, she'd do the same thing to other people who didn't fit her vision of the perfect community. Sitting there with those legal documents in my hands, I felt genuinely powerful for the first time in weeks. Just as I thought I might finally have a chance to fight back, the phone rang. It was a sheriff's deputy. Nancy had filed a restraining order against me. I wasn't just dealing with a petty neighbor anymore. This was a full-blown legal battle, and I had no idea what was coming next. I stared at the restraining order in my hands, my heart pounding. Before I could process what it meant, there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there, their faces unreadable. "We need to talk," they said. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I reached out to a few neighbors who had been through the same nightmare. It turned out I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. Nancy had a history of this, manipulating the HOA and pushing people around. Together we started planning our next move. I realized that fighting Nancy alone was probably a mistake. I needed trusted people with different skills to help me handle whatever she was planning. I reached out to 3 people I knew I could count on. Adam, military tactics expert and mechanical engineer. He's tall, quiet, but has extensive experience handling high-pressure situations. If things got complicated, Adam would know how to keep everyone calm and focused. Chris, information systems analyst and data researcher. He has an incredible ability to find information online, especially the kind of sensitive information that people prefer to keep hidden. Julia, the land rights lawyer, who was already helping me now, officially joining as a full team member. Having a real team felt like the first smart decision I'd made since this nightmare began. We decided to meet in my old barn, which we quickly transformed into our unofficial headquarters for planning and strategy. I told them the complete story from the very beginning, Nancy's arrival, the systematic harassment, the failed negotiations, and my recent legal discoveries. Adam listened carefully and nodded. Her behavior sounds way too organized and experienced. I'd bet money she's done this exact same thing before somewhere else. Julia agreed. Nancy's tactics are too sophisticated for someone who's new to this kind of power game. I was starting to feel like maybe I wasn't crazy after all. These were smart people, and they were seeing the same patterns I was seeing. Chris was already pulling out his laptop, ready to start digging into Nancy's background. We divided responsibilities based on everyone's strengths. Adam would develop tactical plans for handling unexpected situations, especially if we had to deal with police or other authorities. I'd spent weeks feeling trapped and angry, but that anger was turning into something stronger. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. It was about protecting the rights of everyone else she'd bullied into submission. It was time to fight back for real. Chris would conduct deep background research into Nancy's past and monitor her current online activities. Julia would prepare comprehensive legal documentation and research similar cases we could use as precedents. I would continue my normal farm activities to avoid making Nancy suspicious about our investigation, while also working on content for my sustainable farming education channel. The feeling of having a real strategy and capable allies was incredible after weeks of feeling helpless and isolated. I wasn't just sitting in my house waiting for the next attack. I was making moves. I filed a formal complaint, printed out every piece of evidence I had, and prepared for the inevitable backlash. But this time, I wasn't afraid. After 2 full days of intensive investigation, Chris looked up from his computer with genuine excitement on his face. "Guys, I found absolutely incredible information about Nancy's background. She used to be the HOA president at a place called Sunset Gardens in Florida. And you're never going to believe what happened there. All of us stopped what we were doing and focused completely on Chris. Nancy was forcibly removed from her position for seriously abusing her power and creating 7 separate lawsuits with community residents. There were even formal accusations of financial fraud and making threats against homeowners. The silence in the barn was deafening as we all processed this information. Nancy wasn't just some difficult neighbor. She was a serial community destroyer with a documented history of ruining people's lives. Chris continued reading from his laptop. She was accused of embezzling over $50,000 from the HOA, budget manipulating board elections, and using her position to harass homeowners who questioned her authority. One family had to get a restraining order against her after she started following their teenage daughter and taking photos of her daily activities. My blood ran cold hearing this. The woman living next door was apparently a genuine predator with a history of stalking and financial crimes. Julia immediately grasped the implications. This explains everything about why she's so obsessed with controlling our community. She's trying to rehabilitate her reputation by proving she can successfully manage a new neighborhood. Dan isn't just defending his own farm, he's preventing a known abuser from victimizing more people. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had a history of destroying people's lives, and now she was trying to do it to me. Chris continued his report. There are court records showing that Nancy used fraudulent tactics, manipulated community votes, and even made death threats against homeowners who opposed her. Just when I thought I might be winning, I found out something that made my blood run cold. Nancy wasn't just some neighborhood tyrant, she had connections. Powerful ones. The HOA. Board wasn't just on her side, they were on the payroll of a major real estate company, trying to turn our neighborhood into a high-end development. With this crucial background information, we created a detailed plan. Julia would prepare complete legal documentation about Nancy's history and establish it as evidence of a pattern of abuse. Chris would continue monitoring Nancy's online activities and communications for any signs of her next move. Adam would develop contingency plans for various scenarios, including situations where Nancy might do something reckless or dangerous. I would continue my normal farm activities while documenting everything for my channel content. For the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't feel alone or helpless. I had smart, capable friends, solid evidence, and a real strategy. I was finally ready for whatever attack Nancy was planning. Understanding Nancy's psychology with her background exposed we could see Nancy's behavior patterns clearly. She was someone who craved control and authority, and when challenged, she escalated rather than backing down. This meant our situation was probably going to get worse before it got better. Adam warned us, people like Nancy don't surrender when they're exposed. They usually double down and try something even more extreme. I couldn't believe what I was reading, but there it was in black and white, a letter from Nancy's lawyer. She was suing me for disturbing the peace and damaging community property. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal battle. It was a declaration of war, and I knew things were about to get a lot worse. It was a beautiful Saturday morning when my team and I decided to film a promotional video for my channel about sustainable organic farming education. We'd planned this for weeks, professional content that would help people understand the environmental and health benefits of organic agriculture. We were all wearing matching shirts with my farm's logo, and our equipment setup looked completely professional. Adam was handling audio equipment, Chris was operating multiple cameras, and Julia was organizing our presentation script. Everything was going perfectly until, well, you can probably guess who showed up to ruin everything. I should have known Nancy wouldn't be able to resist interfering with anything that looked official or professional happening on my property. "Hey, what the hell do you people think you're doing?" Nancy's scream shattered the peaceful morning air like a fire alarm. She came running toward our fence with her face bright red with rage, looking at us like we were a terrorist cell planning an attack. "Good morning, Nancy. We're filming an educational video about sustainable farming practices," I replied calmly. "Filming? Did you get official permission from the HOA for commercial filming activities? This is a serious violation of our residential community regulations." Julia stepped forward professionally. "Ma'am, this is educational content about agriculture, which is completely legal activity on private agricultural property." I actually thought that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. Nancy's obsession with controlling every aspect of my farm had reached a completely insane level. Instead of just yelling and arguing like usual, Nancy did something that shocked all of us. She ran over to my water spigot, which was located near the fence line between our properties, turned it on full blast, and deliberately aimed the high-pressure water stream directly at our expensive electronic filming equipment. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" Adam immediately rushed over to protect our cameras and sound equipment. The woman had completely lost her mind and was now destroying thousands of dollars worth of equipment just to stop us from filming educational content. As Nancy stood there screaming at me, I didn't just film her out of spite. I was gathering evidence for something bigger. This wasn't just about her destroying my property anymore. This was about exposing her for what she really was. A bully using the HOA as a weapon. Chris kept his camera rolling and captured Nancy's entire meltdown on video. Nancy pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911, speaking in a fake panicked voice that was clearly calculated to get maximum emergency response. "Hello, 911 Emergency Services. I need to report an extremely urgent situation. There is a group of suspicious people with unknown intentions who appear to be illegally occupying the farm property next to my house. They're all wearing identical uniforms, and they have complex electronic surveillance equipment set up everywhere. They're making threatening statements, and I believe they might be terrorists or involved in some kind of serious criminal activity. They directly threatened me when I approached them to ask questions. I'm a single woman living alone, and I am absolutely terrified for my safety. Please send police officers immediately. The four of us just stared at each other in complete disbelief. Chris had the presence of mind to keep his camera rolling and record Nancy's entire fake 911 call. The woman was committing a serious felony right in front of multiple witnesses with video evidence. I couldn't believe the level of deception in her voice. She sounded genuinely terrified and desperate, like she was actually in mortal danger. If I hadn't been standing right there watching her manufacture this entire crisis, I would have believed her performance myself. The way she described us as terrorists with surveillance equipment, while we were clearly just filming educational content about organic farming, was absolutely insane. I wasn't just scared of her anymore, I was angry. And that anger gave me the strength to push back to stop letting her walk all over me. I called my lawyer again, but this time I wasn't asking for advice, I was making a plan. Adam shook his head slowly. She just committed a serious felony right in front of witnesses. Julia smiled grimly. Making false emergency reports to 911 is a criminal offense that can result in jail time. 15 minutes later, 2 police patrol cars arrived with sirens blaring and lights flashing. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles, with their hands positioned near their weapons, clearly treating this as a potentially dangerous situation. Nancy immediately ran toward them, like she was being rescued from a disaster, gesturing wildly and pointing in our direction. Officers, thank God you're here. Those are the people I called about. The suspicious group with all the equipment. They threatened me when I tried to ask them what they were doing. The irony was incredible. Nancy had called 911 to report me and my squad as dangerous, and now she was about to face the consequences of her own lies. The lead police officer looked at our group, then at Nancy, and addressed me directly. Sir, we received an emergency call reporting trespassing, threatening behavior, and possible criminal activity. Can you explain what's happening here? I remained completely calm and respectful. Officer, this is my family's farm, and we're filming educational content about organic farming for our channel. All of our activities are completely legal, and we have proper documentation. Julia immediately provided the officers with official land ownership certificates and property deeds, current agricultural business licenses, educational filming permits from the county video footage of Nancy deliberately damaging our equipment documentation of Nancy's history of false complaints. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. Nancy was out of control. I stepped forward, looking her in the eye, and said, "You want to fight this out in court? Let's do it." Her eyes widened, and for the first time I saw doubt flicker in her expression. She wasn't so sure anymore. The professional way my team handled the situation clearly impressed the officers, while Nancy's hysterical behavior was making her look increasingly unstable. The lead officer carefully examined all our documentation, observed our professional filming setup, and then turned to address Nancy. Ma'am, these individuals are clearly operating legally on their own property. Their documentation is completely in order, and their activities are legitimate agricultural education. Furthermore, we have video evidence showing that you deliberately damaged their property, and your emergency call appears to contain false information. No, that's impossible. They're obviously doing something wrong. They have suspicious equipment and evil intentions. Why won't you arrest them like I asked? The officer's tone became stern. Ma'am, filing false emergency reports is a serious crime. You could face criminal charges for wasting emergency resources. Nancy's public humiliation was complete, but I could see in her eyes that this was just making her more dangerous. The police officers left after giving Nancy an official warning about false 911 calls. We had clearly won this confrontation, but I knew Nancy well enough by now to realize this wasn't going to be the end. Nancy's humiliation was complete and public, but that also made her more dangerous. Honestly, do you think Nancy would actually stop here, or was this just going to make her even more desperate? Adam warned us as we watched the police cars drive away. She's been publicly embarrassed by law enforcement. People like that usually escalate to their most extreme behavior when they feel cornered. We knew we needed to prepare for whatever desperate move Nancy would make next. Watching the police cars disappear down the road, I felt victorious and vindicated. But the look on Nancy's face as she stared at me from her window was absolutely terrifying in its intensity. As I was packing up my equipment, thinking the confrontation was over, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A sheriff's car pulling into my driveway. I froze. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. Nancy had escalated things. This was a legal battle, and I was already in over my head. I wasn't just sitting at home waiting for the lawsuit to arrive. I reached out to every neighbor who had ever been threatened by Nancy. It was time for her to realize she wasn't going to do this to just me. This fight was about to go public, and I had the proof to back it up. 1 week after the humiliating 911 incident, I received official legal papers delivered by a court officer. Nancy was suing me in civil court for creating ongoing community disturbance, violating HOA, covenants, and threatening neighborhood security. I decided to play a psychological game. I sent Nancy a surrender letter through my lawyer, asking her to drop the lawsuit so we could resolve everything peacefully. Nancy's response was swift and arrogant. "Now you're finally scared. Too bad it's way too late for that." The anxiety that had been gnawing at me for weeks started to fade. In its place was something sharper focus. I wasn't going to let Nancy destroy my family's legacy. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially her, tear down everything we'd worked for. I arrived at the courthouse with Julia and our complete evidence file. Nancy showed up with the entire HOA board as her witnesses acting like she'd already won, and this was just a formality. The courtroom was packed with neighbors and community members. Word had spread throughout our area about this dramatic legal showdown. I noticed several people I'd contacted about Nancy's pattern of harassment sitting in the gallery, ready to testify if needed. Nancy took the stand and delivered a theatrical performance that would have been impressive if it wasn't built entirely on lies. She presented doctored videos claiming to show excessive noise, actually just normal farm sounds like cows mooing and dogs barking during herding. She showed photographs of my unsightly and messy farm, actually just normal agricultural soil, and organic composting areas. Most shocking of all, she presented completely fabricated evidence, claiming I had personally threatened her safety. She even brought fake witnesses from the HOA board, who testified under oath that they'd heard me making threatening statements. "Your Honor, Dan has systematically destroyed the peace, safety, and property values of our upscale residential community," she declared dramatically. I couldn't believe she was still lying under oath, but there she was, doubling down on every false claim she'd ever made about my farm. Nancy had prepared for this trial like it was the most important case in legal history. She had charts, graphs, professional-looking exhibits, and a presentation that probably took weeks to prepare. The woman had invested serious time and money into this elaborate fraud, which made her eventual downfall even more satisfying to witness. Instead of arguing against Nancy's individual claims, Julia went straight for the nuclear option. "Your Honor, before this court considers any of these accusations, I believe it's essential to examine the credibility, character, and true motivations of the person making these claims." Julia then systematically presented official court records from Florida, showing complete documentation of Nancy's removal from her previous HOA position for abuse of power. Financial fraud evidence proving that Nancy had falsely declared her income and assets to avoid paying proper taxes when purchasing her house. Video evidence of perjury showing Chris's recording of Nancy's completely false 911 call. Property destruction evidence with clear video of Nancy deliberately destroying our filming equipment. The courtroom atmosphere completely shifted as Nancy's entire history of lies and criminal behavior was exposed. Nancy didn't threaten me again. No, she tried something different. She showed up at my front door, not with accusations, but with tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quivering. But I wasn't fooled. The woman who had made my life hell for months wasn't going to escape without consequences. The entire courtroom went completely silent. Nancy's face turned white as paper, and her confident expression collapsed into pure panic. The judge looked directly at Nancy with obvious disapproval. "Mrs. Nancy, can you provide any explanation for this evidence of your previous misconduct and current dishonesty?" Being cornered with undeniable evidence of her lies and criminal behavior, Nancy completely lost control of herself. "No, this is all fake. This is a massive conspiracy against me. They're all working together to destroy me. I'm the real victim here." She jumped up from her chair, began waving her arms wildly, and started screaming incoherently about plots and frame-ups. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. "Ma'am, you need to control yourself immediately." Nancy had finally been exposed for what she really was, a dangerous liar who'd been terrorizing communities for years. In her complete mental breakdown, Nancy did something absolutely insane that sealed her fate forever. She grabbed the large water pitcher from the defendant's table and hurled it directly at the electrical control panel located near the judge's bench. The impact caused immediate electrical sparks. Smoke began pouring from the damaged system, and the courthouse's automatic fire alarm system activated with deafening sirens. Security guards rushed toward Nancy, but she continued throwing objects and screaming about being persecuted. Following strict courthouse security protocols for emergency situations involving potential attacks, the fire department immediately responded with full emergency equipment to handle the electrical fire and smoke. The SWAT team was automatically dispatched because someone had physically attacked courthouse infrastructure during legal proceedings. The scene became absolute chaos, emergency sirens blaring, firefighters in full gear rushing in with extinguishers and breathing equipment. SWAT team members in bulletproof vests and helmets storming into the courtroom with weapons ready. Nancy stood frozen in the center of the chaos, completely surrounded by the very SWAT team and fire department that she had essentially summoned through her own insane and criminal actions. The perfect irony: she had called 911 to report me and my squad as dangerous, but ended up needing emergency responders to stop her own violent breakdown. When order was finally restored and the electrical fire was extinguished, the judge was absolutely furious and ready to throw the book at Nancy for her outrageous behavior. Mrs. Nancy, based on the overwhelming evidence presented today, I am not only rejecting your lawsuit completely, but I am ordering immediate criminal prosecution for the following offenses: filing false legal claims under oath, also known as perjury, previous financial fraud in property declarations, making false emergency reports to 911 services, destruction of private property, physical attack on courthouse facilities during legal proceedings. And Nancy was immediately handcuffed and arrested by courthouse security right there in front of everyone. The SWAT team and firefighters watched as she was led away, still screaming about conspiracies and persecution. My entire team watched in amazement as our primary enemy was taken down entirely by her own actions and lies. Justice had finally been served in the most spectacular way possible. Word about the trial outcome spread rapidly throughout our neighborhood. People who had believed Nancy's lies and avoided me began coming forward to apologize. Mr. Peterson brought me a homemade apple pie, clearly embarrassed about how he'd treated me. "I'm so sorry, Dan. I should have talked to you directly instead of listening to her stories." The HOA board immediately removed Nancy from all positions and asked me to help them create new fair policies that would protect both homeowners' rights and legitimate agricultural operations. Just as the judge called the court to order, I noticed Nancy sitting there, smiling smugly. But then her lawyer stood up and said the one thing that changed everything. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the defendant has been making false accusations and defaming my client." I couldn't believe it. Nancy had prepared a counterattack, and I had no idea what was coming next. Standing on my front porch that evening, watching my cows graze peacefully in the golden sunset light, I had time to really think about everything that had happened. I realized that sometimes the best way to defeat a bully isn't to fight them directly. It's to stand firm in what's right and let them destroy themselves with their own dishonesty and arrogance. As I reflected on the whole ordeal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace knowing that the truth had ultimately won. It wasn't about winning in court or getting revenge, but about maintaining my integrity no matter how far Nancy went to discredit me. If you're still here, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced someone like Nancy, and how did you handle it? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories, and if you want to support the channel, hit the super thanks button below. Thanks for being here. Catch you in the next one.
We're QA Stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.